The slides are mainly to remind me what I'm meant to be saying. I've called this Estonia, E-Residency and Me. So I'm not Estonian. I lived in Estonia. I am advising the Estonian government, but I'm making this talk in my own capacity. So this is not the government of Estonia speaking. So these are just my opinions about something I think is interesting and relevant to Kosovo. A little bit about Estonia, quite a lot about Estonia. It's not that much smaller than your own country. And I think the internet penetration here is also very high. But the main thing about Estonia, it's a world leader in connectivity and tech. When I lived there, which was some years ago, Estonia is where I saw my first free public Wi-Fi sign in 2001. I had the fastest internet connection I've had up till now about 7 years ago in my home in Estonia. And Estonia has gone very, very online. And I'll talk a bit about why. But in a nutshell, they came out of communism with nothing. And I once asked the Estonian President, who's a geek, how did Estonia end up so connected? And he said, well, we got our own country back, but we only had 1.2 million people back then. And when you have your own country, you have to have all the things a state has. You have to have a police service, a hospital, you have to have a legal service. We just didn't have enough people. So we had to use technology very early on to try and make this country work. That's where Estonia is. Interesting location, so right up against Russia. It's the top right-hand corner of the European Union now. So the border between Tallinn and between Estonia and Russia is also the border between Schengen and the EU and Russia. But it's also 18 minutes in a helicopter from Helsinki. It's about 1 hour by boat. So the other story I heard a long time ago about how Estonia managed to become so connected is that the US government used to put big antenna along the Finnish coast pointing at Estonia, and the Estonians in the north of the country in Tallinn had their TV aerials facing Finland. So whilst they were living under communism, they were able to start watching Western television and learning about capitalism. So when they became independent, they were the country that developed most quickly out of communism into free market economics. So yeah, it's a small country. It makes it very easy for people to decide to do something. And I was a policy advisor with the British government when I first went to Estonia. And it was at a time, 2001, when we were trying to figure out how do you get broadband to work. And there was this debate over content versus, infrastructure versus content. So British Telecom in England was saying, we're not going to lay all these expensive cables till there's content on the cables to justify it. And people like AOL at the time were saying, well, we're not going to produce the content till the cables exist. And everyone was just sitting there arguing. And I got to Tallinn and there was broadband Wi-Fi everywhere. And no one could tell me how or why. And I still think to this day it was about social capital. It was about the society deciding together, we're just going to make this work. And back then everyone's Wi-Fi was open. I got my first iPhone 1 and I walked around Tallinn connecting to all the Wi-Fi signals. And after that it was always connected when I walked around. They also had the benefit of no heritage. So when you get a new country and there's nothing old to build on, you can start from scratch. So the problem we had in the UK at the time is very old telecommunication system with very old cables in the ground, very expensive to upgrade it. Estonia had nothing, so they could build the new things better. And they're also very close to Scandinavia, so they had a lot of help and a lot of influence from countries like Sweden and Finland. It's also about the right people at the right time. So they had a very fast-moving president after communism, who was a Thatcherite. But more recently, and the story we'll talk about here, they have a president who's actually grew up in America, who's a geek, and I've been to Silicon Valley with him, and we had great fun going to visit all the Silicon Valley companies. Recently, they have a prime minister who is, I think, 37, and the team who built Estonian E-Residency, the head of E-Residency, is 27. So a very young country, very connected, very tech-friendly, and they have to deal with a whole lot of interesting problems. So Estonia is the size of the Netherlands with a population of Amsterdam. So when you fly over from England to Tallinn, you know you've hit the Estonian border from the plane at night, because while you're flying over Scandinavia, there's lots of lights everywhere, and then suddenly it just goes pitch dark. And that's Estonia. You'll see a little light here, a little light here. But they also have in their constitution that access to the internet is a fundamental human right. So that creates a problem. The problem is, all the young people are moving from the villages and the towns into the city. So if you have a little old woman living in a cottage somewhere in a forest, she has to have access to the internet, because it's a fundamental human right. And that then drives a whole load of other infrastructure to keep up with that. Another few things helped. So who's heard of Skype? Really? That's about 10 people. I think some of you are just not putting your hands up. Thank you. Who's heard of TransferWise? One or two. You. More recently, Jobatical, Thunderbeam, Teleport, PocketPay. So Estonia is now beginning to churn out startups. And when I was working there with the startup community a long time ago, Skype was great. So it is said, and you can look this up, that the year Skype got sold, the first time, Estonian GDP went like this, because so many people in the country made so much money. But those people came back. So those people set up Ambient Sound in VC. They have a proper international standard venture capital fund that was set up by the Skype engineers who made a huge amount of money. Some of them, Sten Tamkivi was one of the Skype executives. He's now founded Teleport. He went to the States, went to Silicon Valley, he worked for Andreessen Horowitz, came back. So it's very interesting now. There's suddenly a lot of angel investors, VC investors, and Estonians who've actually been back out to Silicon Valley, out into the real world, come back in, and they're putting their money and their knowledge back into the economy. And that's led to a whole load of other startups coming out of the economy recently. When we were in Silicon Valley with the president, I think it was something like 2007, and he did this talk about Skype, and I said to him afterwards, you can't keep doing this because it's just one company, and it happened quite a long time ago. It's going to get embarrassing unless you have another one. And then Seedcamp invested in TransferWise. TransferWise raised a huge amount of money, and then a whole load of other companies did. So the story is more credible when you've actually got 5, 6, 7, 8 good startups coming out of a country. This is a quote from the Estonian Government website, which you can read more easily than I can. So yeah, they have infrastructure, they've centralized a lot of their systems, and this is really what's driving everything. So this is called X-Road. So in my country, in England, each bit of government has its own servers and databases, and they're all built on different infrastructure, different hardware, different software, and it's almost impossible to connect them all. What Estonia did is built this thing through the middle that was able to talk to each government database, pull data down and move it around and across. So technically, and I've seen this happen, an Estonian police car driving behind you in Tallinn can look up your social security. My friend got pulled over for not having renewed his driving license, but they could see that from inside the police car. Obviously, not everyone has access to everything, but at least the whole of the government infrastructure is connected. X-Road connected with the bottom right. So 2001, I had an ID card in Estonia with a chip, and I could plug it into the side of a computer and log into practically everything. I could log into my banking, I could log into the government, I could submit my tax return. It was very advanced, and that was just in Estonia. And because of that, Estonians can do a lot of things online that most of us can't. And I say this from the perspective of the UK, which is struggling to catch up with something like this. So when you're born when you have a child in Estonia, they're automatically registered online as existing, and they're given a number. And after that, they're given a name. So every Estonian has a number first, and that's your digital identifier in government. And that allows you to do all of these other things. They have digital government, they have paperless cabinet meetings, so the government doesn't use paper in their cabinet meetings, and they can vote online. On the back of all of this, I think about 2 years ago, the very young Prime Minister set up a group of people like Sten, the Skype guys, to advise him on tech, and they're all friends. They're all about the same age, they all went to school together, and they'd meet up once a month and just talk about what could be happening in the country. And one of them told me the story. He said, we kind of came up with this really stupid idea. We said, we've got all this digital infrastructure, why don't we let foreign people get an Estonian ID card and access some of the Estonian government services? The problem they had is, there's a guy, Taavi Kotka is the CIO of Estonia, the Chief Information Officer. And he said, the problem we've got is we've only got 1.2 million people, so our GDP can only grow by 1.2 million people. And even if those people work really, really, really hard, at the end of the day, the GDP can't grow beyond what 1.2 million people can create. Second problem, no one wants to go to Estonia. It's very pretty. It's extremely cold in the winter. It's quite far away from things. It's great for hardware startups because there's nothing to do for 7 or 8 months of the year because it's so cold and dark. So it's a great place to work. But it's not a country that everyone wants to go and hang out in. So they were looking at this problem, saying, well, we don't have enough people. No one really wants to come here. How do we increase the GDP? How do we increase the population? So the crazy idea was, how about we create digital people? How about we let people become Estonians without coming here? And they threw this idea out of the Prime Minister's meeting. They forgot about it. And a month later, the Prime Minister said, that idea you had? Let's do it. And they decided to do it as a startup. So he said, I don't really know where this is going to go or how it's going to work. Let's build an MVP and see what happens. This is, for me, when I got interested. Having worked with governments and policy in other countries, governments don't do that. Governments like to plan everything. They like to de-risk everything and then make it fail. This government turned around and said, well, look, here's a really small amount of money. Let's build a tiny team. The guy they got in, Kasper Korius, was, I think, 26 at the time. They said, let's just build this thing and see what happens. Now, I think that's pretty cool. I think for a government to do that, that's pretty cool. And the idea was that you could get a card, you could open a bank account in Estonia, you could open a company, and you could run an Estonian business from anywhere in the world. And it was a great idea because all of these Estonian businesses and these e-residents would pay tax in Estonia. It would increase the GDP of the country and the tax base. So they launched it. And then one of the problems they discovered was, of course, if you're running a company abroad and you're not in Estonia, you don't pay tax in Estonia. So suddenly they figured, well, then it's not going to make any money. But then they realized, actually, if you're running in a company that's based in Estonia, you still need to use accountants, you need to use banks, you need to use lawyers. So it's still going to bring money into the economy. So what we have now with e-Residency is anyone in the world, in theory, and we'll get to that, can apply for e-Residency. You get a same digital identity card the Estonians have had since 2001. You can plug it in the side of your computer. You can open a company. You can notarize documents. Fairly soon, you can open a bank account, which is one of the things I had to bring in. And then you can run a business in the European Union from anywhere. So the second reason I got interested in this is in my accelerator, I had another Palestinian startup was in my program, and they'd also been in Estonia, so they had an Estonian business. So for this Palestinian team to to notarize a contract when they were in Palestine, they had to fly from Palestine to Estonia. Now, you may understand this from Kosovo. Palestine isn't recognized by everybody, so you can't just fly from Palestine to Estonia. You have to fly through countries that recognize your Palestinian passport. When you get to Estonia, you have to go to the notary, and they got to the notary, and the notary said, look, there's this one of the documents you have signed from Palestine, you've got to apostille it. You can't apostille it in Estonia, you've got to go to another country, but you have to go to another country that recognizes Palestine. So for this startup, it was really, really tough. And then when they got an e-Residency card, they were just able to sit in our building in Berlin and notarize the document from there. So I thought this was very interesting. I thought it was interesting for Palestinians, interesting when I was talking to Kustrim, who was having the same problem having a Kosovo passport. So I decided I would try and help. So just explaining my role, having lived in Estonia, I went out, and one of the great things about small countries like Tallinn, I went out for 48 hours. I managed to meet the head of e-Residency, the CIO of Estonia, the head of digital policy in the government, the British ambassador, and the head of the accelerator. And I said, look, my thing is I build ecosystems. I get innovators together around a very specific topic. So how about we have a go doing this with e-Residency? And they all went, yeah, sounds good. Head of digital policy, the senior advisor to the Prime Minister, it was summer, met me in Parliament, and I had to go through all the security, and he was sitting up in his boss's office in a pair of shorts, T-shirts, and flip-flops. So this is Estonia. It's very, very informal, very easy to communicate and find people. So I went off and started organizing events around, first in London with Mike, where I got people into a room to talk about e-Residency, to hack ideas, got the Estonians to fly in and talk about it. And over the last year, we've got 700 people together in London, Berlin, San Francisco, New York, Tokyo, and Singapore. And one of the interesting things that we found was, in New York in particular, the Estonians are sort of thinking, this e-Residency thing, it's kind of cool, but whatever. And one of the reasons they think that is, if you get an e-Residency card, you can do everything they've been doing since 2001. So they're sort of going, well, what's the big deal? The guys in New York, were saying, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. This is insane. You can do what? So everywhere they've been going, they've been sort of greeted like heroes, and they're all a bit confused about it. So this is how it happened. I have no idea what order the slides are in. Yeah, mainly legislative. It was an interesting thing that actually to build e-Residency, the main work that the team had to do was changing law. So it wasn't about technology. Curiously enough, in Estonia, they've pioneered using open source software in government. It's something the British have started learning from and doing. So again, not doing these massive government contracts, but actually getting small teams to build things quickly. So each ministry in Estonia is responsible for building its own technology to make e-Residency work. The challenge was getting the law to work. So again, what interested me, having seen other countries failing, Casper's job was to change laws to make this work, and one of them was in Estonia, you have to meet a banker to open a bank account. So when they launched e-Residency in beta, they said, great news, you can get a card, open a company, open a bank account, run a business, but you've got to come to Estonia to open the bank account. And that didn't really work if you're in Singapore. So the whole thing was not really going anywhere. And people were saying, well, this is kind of cool, I got my card, but I can't really use it for anything. So they said, okay, we've got to change the law. And I think it took them 7 months to change that law, which if any of you know about governments, that's pretty nuts. These things normally take a very, very long time. So they've been changing laws, they've been causing a lot of trouble. So yeah, this was Tavi's original quote as to why they did this. So one of the things that interested me when I was talking to Kustrim a long time ago about this is people I knew here running tech companies having all sorts of problems because they can't build directly. A lot of the Kosovo infrastructure isn't connected to other global systems. And e-Residency seemed like a great opportunity for countries like this, for tech people doing outsourcing, to run a company inside the European Union with EU banking, everything that the Estonians enjoy, but being able to do it from your desk here in Kosovo. Now, since all that happened, my country's gone insane and wants to leave the European Union, just like yours wants to join. So all of a sudden, the Estonians the other day launched a whole new web page, just called Stay in the EU, where they were saying, if you're in Britain and you're running a business and you want to stay running in the EU, get an e-Residency card, set up a business in Estonia. So since they launched it, 10,000 people have signed up as e-residents. These are probably out of date now because the statistics do this every day. 560 new company owners, and 1,100 companies have been registered in Estonia. So it's not going to change the economy of the country overnight. I had a meeting with the Estonian ambassador in London, who's an old guy, really cool guy, and he was saying, I don't get this. He said, back home, we're not that sure about this. I mean, what if it fails? And this is a proper old-fashioned government approach. What if it fails? It's a terrible idea. And I said, you're looking at it from an Estonian perspective. From where I'm standing, you can't fail, because everyone thinks your country is really cool. I've seen how people in New York and Silicon Valley react when they learn about e-Residency. So it's been an incredible bit of public relations. Loads of people, these 10,000 guys who've got their cards, loads of them want to go to Estonia. They sort of feel an attachment to the country once they've got it. So there's been a huge amount of publicity, a lot of media coverage, people going to Estonia. So I think it's been successful, even if it fails as a system, but I don't think it will fail. So going back to how and why these things happen, this is a photograph I took. So Latitude is Estonia's tech conference. There's Casper, who's the head of e-Residency, who's by then about 28. Front row of the conference, that one there, is the president of Estonia. Now, I don't know many countries where you get the president of the country sitting in the front row at a tech conference for the whole day. And he was asking some quite challenging questions of Casper. So the president's cool. He goes and visits startups. He hangs out at tech conferences. Unfortunately, he's going to stop in September. But when you ask about people here, I've been talking to people about it the last few days, how did this happen? It's this luck. You have a tech-friendly president. That really helps. So yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in whether this could work in Kosovo. When I first met Casper, I said to him, this would be great in Kosovo. Why don't we all fly down and set up e-Residency here? And there were a whole lot of problems. So for a start, one of the reasons it works is in European Union law, there are different levels of identity. And there's a sort of gold standard, which is you've met somebody. So to get e-Residency, you have to sit in front of an Estonian police officer who looks at your passport, takes your fingerprints, and verifies your identity. So in that sense, it's very, very secure. But the problem is, as I discovered when I asked him, an Estonian police officer can't come down here into somebody else's country in a uniform and start fingerprinting people. So it's actually quite complicated. So they can do this in consuls, but there isn't a consul here. So the nearest consulate is in Vienna. So the downside is, for any of you to get e-residency, you can apply online, but you have to go to Vienna to show the passport. So my challenge to all of you is, if enough people in Kosovo apply for this, we can ask the Estonians to get the consulate from Vienna to come here. So I can't guarantee that'll happen, but I think it's an interesting opportunity. So some of the guys I've been talking to are very interested in seeing whether this could work in Kosovo. If you go and check estonia.com, if you all start applying, they'll notice, and I'll tell them. Kristrim's in Estonia next week, usefully enough, meeting the guys. But I think there's a great opportunity for countries like yours and mine that are not in the European Union. I mean, I have a simple problem. I have a company and a bank account in the UK. I've got a team in Berlin. Each time I pay them, I get screwed by the bank in the UK. So I want to have a Euro business account that I can pay my Euro bills from. And the only way to do that really is to have a European company with an account. To set up a company in Germany is really complicated and expensive. So I'm going to set up a company in Estonia just so I can have a Euro account attached to a company to receive money and pay it out again. Because my team are now, thanks to the Brexit vote, the team I employ in Berlin are 10% more expensive the next morning because the pound went. So I'd rather like to have a European account and company. So that's why I'm doing it. I think it's very interesting. I'd love you guys to check it out. And I also thought we were discussing it. It's an inspiring topic because occasionally things in countries work. And it's quite interesting to understand how and why that is. So thank you.